Exodus, the anti-fairy tale, Pesach 5781. Fairy tales often feature a noble person being brought up by humble people. However, the noble person eventually is able to reclaim his or her lofty noble status. Think about Cinderella, the classic fairy tale. Mythology is similar. Often we have a noble child being exposed to the elements. Humble people save the child, bring up the child, but later on the child learns about his noble identity and is able to reclaim it. Think about figures such as Sargon, Cyrus, Oedipus, Romulus, and Gilgamesh. Sigmund Freud, points out that the Moshe or Moses story is similar, with one major difference. Instead of finding out he's a noble person being brought up by a humble family, he's a prince whose true parents are slaves. As Rabbi Jonathan Sachs points out, this is a myth in reverse. Freud's response is to turn the Moshe story into a regular myth. He actually claims in the original version Moshe was born a prince of Egypt, but Pharaoh was warned of a prophecy in which a member of his house would eventually challenge him. So Paro had the baby Moshe thrown into the river, and Amram and Yocheved adopt him and save him. Now it's a typical myth. We have a prince being adopted by lonely people who will eventually rise up again. However, Rabbi Sachs says this makes no sense whatsoever, Freud's version of the story, simply because nobody would tell this type of story. The Egyptians wouldn't. They're not interested in glorifying Moshe, their arch nemesis. The British aren't going to glorify George Washington. They're not going to glorify Moshe. The Israelites wouldn't tell the story. Why would they want to say their hero, their savior, was an Egyptian, one of the enemy? But there's something more important than that. That is, the Torah's version of a story is much more inspiring. It's telling us we do not have to be born to greatness in order to be great. All it takes is the moral courage to choose to be great. Moshe chose to be great. He was willing to give up his rank and his privilege to side with a bunch of lowly slaves. And he did so by killing the Egyptian taskmaster. Where did he learn such moral courage from? Perhaps he learned it from his adoptive mother, Bat Paro, Pharaoh's daughter. The Talmud tells us that she was going to save Moshe from the water, going to pull him out. Her servants were saying to her, "Your father, the king, has decreed that these babies should die. You cannot undermine them." But she did. She had the moral courage to do so because she understood the difference between right and wrong. Or maybe Moshe learned this moral courage from his own mom, Yocheved, who nursed him. As he grew up, she must have told him stories of the Avot, the patriarchs Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. These were nomads who had no real power, yet they changed the world through their moral courage by answering God's call, and that in itself empowered them. Moshe realized it was his job to continue their work. As we daven in the Amidah, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov, and we recall Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus at the Seder, we're reminded it's also our job to continue the work of the Avot and of Moshe. All we need is the moral courage to do so.